In the NLT's translation of Exodus 25, verses 10 through 22, we see God speak to Moses, instructing him to have the people make an ark of acacia wood, a sacred chest 45 inches long, 27 inches wide, and 27 inches high. Overlay it inside and outside with pure gold, and run a molding of gold all around it. Cast 4 gold rings and attach them to its 4 feet, 2 rings on each side. Make poles from acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Insert the poles into the rings at the sides of the ark to carry it. These carrying poles must stay inside the rings. Never remove them. When the ark is finished, place inside the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant which I will give to you. Then make the ark's cover, the place of atonement, from pure gold. It must be 45 inches long and 27 inches wide. Then make 2 cherubim from hammered gold and place them on the 2 ends of the atonement cover. Mold the cherubim on each end of the atonement cover, making it all of one piece of gold. The cherubim will face each other and look down on the atonement cover. With their wings spread above it, they will protect it. Place inside the ark the stone tablets inscribed with the terms of the covenant, which I will give to you. Then put the atonement cover on top of the ark. I will meet with you there and talk to you from above the atonement cover between the gold cherubim that hover over the ark of the covenant. From there, I will give you my commands for the people of Israel. Here we have one of the most compelling mysteries of history. In the construction of the Ark of the Covenant, as it, in just a few hundred years' time from these verses, will simply disappear from the biblical narrative, which we'll be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. Guys, I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Geekology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. And I am joined tonight by my new official co-host, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
What's up, you geeks? Yep, I'm back.
Yeah, Joe, like last time, had wanted to join in on the fun. Then he asked me after, like, hey, can we make this like more of a permanent thing? And I was like, yeah, you mean I don't have to talk as much? Yes, please. And here we are. And of course, I just love hanging out with Joe.
Yep. Yeah. Exploring the unexplainable is fun.
Oh yes. So this is just a fun thing I just started doing once a month, and to have someone alongside me who also cares a lot about these things, who can try to provide a different perspective than me, is also something I desperately need. So I'm glad to have you on, man. We're gonna get into this bad boy.
Cool.
So guys, just as a reminder, our schedule is to once a month cover one of 6 categories. You have cryptozoology, the paranormal, religious strangeness. It's what we're doing this month. Then we have the weird and the unexplained, true crime, and ufology. Now, this episode in particular, the topic was voted on by Systematic Geekology fans on the Priest of the Geeks page on Facebook. I try and put them there to give me enough time to prepare a couple months in advance so you guys can vote on them. I don't vote on them, not because I don't have some ethical concerns, it's because I'd vote for every single one, which kind of defeats the point because, I picked these topics. So that's where we're at. So if you guys would like to have a chance to have a say on what topic we do next, which, by the way, the one we're doing next month took me completely by surprise, Dark Horse Victory. We'll get to that later on. Then please head over to Priest of the Geeks page and join. So, Joe, as we get in there, studying the Ark, like, what is your history with doing so? And I know you've got something a little special for the audience as well.
Yeah. So so the first time that I really took time to study it was when I was doing a Bible study, a devotional style Bible reading that was happening every day called The Whole Truth. And basically just walking from end to end, helping people just read through your Bible once from cover to cover. And I took time to think, like, to really try and think through, like, just the realities of this group of people being asked to take up an offering, and then taking that offering and essentially building what is ostensibly the first signifier signal of God's presence, a stand-in of God's presence. And so now I actually just today in my Friday morning live stream, we went through the chapters for that walk through the Ark and the construction of it and all of that kind of stuff. And This time was helping the audience to be able to, we call it demystifying the Old Testament, where, you just kind of go through and it's building up reps on how to be able to work your way through the Old Testament well with, a Christocentric mindset and the whole 9 yards. And so, just today, going through this, it's an interesting juxtaposition now to be talking about, okay, so this big thing, right? All of this work gets put into this thing. It's this ornate, you can just and if you sit there and you thoughtfully read through the entire descriptor of the building of this thing, kind of the beauty and almost majesty of it kind of leaps off the page a bit when you realize, like, just the raw materials that are used and the craftsmanship and all of that kind of stuff. And it's this significant symbol and then just gone. Not to be spoken of again, and nobody knows hide or hair of where this thing is. And so, yeah, it's an interesting perspective, having just read through the creation of it, now to be talking about this.
Oh, yes. And you were also working on a paper. Are you still working on that right now?
Yeah. So I am going through essentially, I'm going through the creation process for writing proofs that will become an article centered around the credibility, essentially establishing a historical and facts-based timeline for the credibility of the Exodus narrative. Given generally, I try very hard to go outside of the realm of anything that could be held in ire by people who would be skeptical, by the skeptical community. And so, yeah, it's right now, I'm about 75% done with the proofs. That then I'll take those proof statements and then turn them into written work.
Okay. Awesome. Me, on the other hand, it's kind of one of those things, like, you hear about it in church growing up. It's like, hey, there's this ark thing, and you may draw it or construct it in Sunday school, or I was never good at any of that anyways. The only artwork I ever got done was the Battle on Hoth, because that's the only thing I knew how to draw, and I still can't even draw that well. So it's one of those things that, yeah, go ahead.
For what it's worth, I consider myself an artist. I express myself in a lot of different ways. If somebody at gunpoint told me to draw a stick figure, I'd be like, hey, what's up, Jesus? You know what I mean? Like, that's I can't draw my way out of a paper bag. If yeah, no, I'm right there with you.
So yeah, AT-ATs are a lot better than people for some reason. Don't know why. It's weird. But as far as the ark is concerned, like, growing up in the church, like, yeah, you hear about it, and maybe I have heard some sermons on, like, how it's been used before, and that may be about it. And I'm sermons plural may even be a misnomer.
Right.
And it's just one of those things. It's like, it shows up. So this cool thing is out there. You carry it around. No, I'll take it back. I have heard sermons before on Samuel, where the second Samuel, where Uzzah gets his end. So the ark obviously comes up in that. And it's like, so you're trying to tell me you touched this thing and you die, and the guy who was trying to, like, wasn't like desecrating or anything, was trying to just put it back in place so it didn't fall.
Yeah.
As a kid, you don't really get that, but now it's, gaining a greater appreciation for God's holiness and, like, setting him apart from here are the rules, you better be following them. I kind of get it a little bit more, and your mileage may vary on how fair that is what it is.
Your mileage may vary. I like that. Yeah. It's a good way. It's a good way to put it, because if you think through that, right? Because that's part of when you're thinking about what could have happened, right? If the Bible is the thing that is writing the rule book for what we believe to be possible considering the ark, then that's obviously the story that you're referencing is something that has to be taken into consideration. And so when
Yes.
you think through, like, yeah, catching it from falling, let it hit the ground. That's not the point. Listen to God. Like, that's really like follow what he's telling you to do. And that understanding that in the greater context of his love and justice and mercy and grace and all of the things, it's requires a level of being relationally intimate, or at least okay with the idea of relational intimacy with God, to be able to wrap your mind around that. But at the same token, that very scene, I mean, that's the source material, right? For Indiana, which Indiana Jones was it where they
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, and then later on, just kind of goes away after a time. It's like there's no ark in the temple in the New Testament that we're aware of. If it is, they don't bring attention to it. Like, so what happens to it? Like, obviously, that being why we're here today. Like, how can you have this thing that is so religiously important to a people, and then they no longer have access to it?
Right.
So yeah, that's how I've kind of studied it in the past. Like, okay, what's the context here? Like, why would God choose to put himself in this, have himself as a physical representation here in the ark? Why would he have them worship using it like that? So, Joe, we don't know where it is. Like, hey, guys, it's still a mystery at the end of this episode. I hate to tell you that.
Yeah.
So should we care at all?
So for me, it's purely the idea of, like, you think about this thing from history, right? From antiquity, that if you could actually uncover it, the beauty that it would that it would behold, if it's still, like, assuming everything held up and everything. But that being said, I mean, we'll get that. But should we care? There's the part of my brain that's like the apologist, right? The same idea as to sitting here writing the papers and involved in that community and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, dude, the devastating shot in favor of Christian apologetics that would come from the Ark of the Covenant being recovered and all of that would be just ridiculous. Like,
yes.
it would be out of bounds. But I think, I don't know. I think my first instinct would be, because it's this beautiful relic of a bygone time. That's kind of the first thought that comes into my mind. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you necessarily care one way or the other whether or not they ever find it?
Yes and no. And the fact that, like, it's not going to prove God's existence to anyone who didn't care before. Like,
that's a good point.
Yeah. But at the same time, wouldn't it be cooler if it's still here? Wouldn't it be better? Like, this has survived over 3,000 years of exchanging hands, of lying underneath the earth. Like, and if it still is immaculate as it was at the very beginning, and no one's been able to strip the gold or anything, or the 10 commandments are in there, Aaron's staff is in there, and the manna, we can actually figure out what manna is right. As a thing. Yeah, sure. Sign me up as one of the first people visiting. But yeah, there's a part of me that thinks in another life I might have become a biblical archaeologist, but then there's the part of me that remembers I'm a prissy little princess who doesn't like to get dirty. So so it fascinates that side, that adventurous side of me, while also going, okay, I wouldn't be the first person engaging in this. So as fun as it would be, for it to be around right now, it doesn't matter, but it'd be cool if it was. That's my official opinion.
Yeah. It's certainly not hanging out in theology prime territory, but I would certainly say it's got more than enough legs to kick the can around about, thinking through it and all that kind of stuff.
So if you're out there and you have no, we've mentioned this term, Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Covenant. What the heck is that? You haven't watched Raiders of the Lost Ark. You haven't done your biblical studies. It's fine. We're here to help you.
First things first. After finish the stream, once you finish the stream, then go watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, because you have to fix that about your life. If you've never watched it, you need to go watch it. You just need to go fix that about your life. Anyway, go ahead.
A very compelling argument. I completely agree. But the ark, as we've seen there, like we got the descriptions of everything, and I'm not a descriptions person. Those are the verses that I kind of like. I read this because of scripture. I appreciate it, but then I'm so glad it's over and done with, and I don't have to read it until I'm rereading the Bible again.
And genealogies. I have had to train myself not to just skim over instruction manuals and genealogy listings. And remember, there's a point for it. There's a point to it being there. There's a point to it being there, because I'm the same way, man. My eyes will glaze over so quickly.
I told someone in my Greek class last year, I would rather write 10 sermons on the musicians in David's court than ever look at another Greek word for the rest of my life.
That's funny.
It just shows how much I hate reading over stuff like that to begin with. Just shows you how much I hate Greek. As a beautiful language as it is, I'm just dumb when it comes to learning anything today in English. And English is a dumb language to begin with. But we're off track. So the Ark of the Covenant. As described there, we get this beautiful, it's made out of gold. There's these specific poles you have to use to make sure you can carry it around. So this was part of its intended use is for worship, is as like a physical representation, not as like an idol, not as like, some icon that's taking away, praise from God, but it's like so that you can imagine as people who, hey, we don't really, you're up there, God, but what is some way I can actually relate to you? This is one way to do that. And it's kind of a physical sign of his presence there as part of, hey, I'm fighting side by side with you as you're going into Canaan, as you're going through this desert for 40 some years. That's about to happen because the Israelites going to Israelite. And I wouldn't have been much better. I probably would have been 80 years if it had been me. It's like, hey, I am with you. And not only that, I am right beside you. And here's a physical representation of that. Then you have the fact we mentioned earlier, like it does house the original, was the second, shall we say, draft of the 10 Commandments after the first ones didn't really survive, Moses' anger, which understandable. Then you have Aaron's budded staff, which is kind of a little miracle that happens early on in Exodus. Then you have a pot containing manna. So the manna would come every day except for the Sabbath. And this is just, hey, generations from now, if God so chooses, you can open this up. The people who are supposed to do it, show the people, hey, this is what manna is. This is a sign of my promise. Now, we mentioned about Uzzah earlier. Uzzah was not a Levite. And specifically, he wasn't from the Kohathite clan. And I don't know if I got that correctly, but I'm going to say it is. And so anyone else who touched the ark improperly would be killed outright. Or if you open it up, you get killed by a bunch of, ghosts, and you just got to avert your eyes. That's definitely scripture. And then its presence was intended for them to be brought into the battlefield, but it didn't guarantee them victory, as we will see later on in scripture. They kind of use it as like a good luck charm versus the actual intended usage. And God would allow them to lose battles, as he does. So we see early on in 1 Samuel, they lose it to Philistia, and he punished the Israelites and punished the Philistines for daring to bring it back to Philistia. So anything you want to add there, Joe?
No, I mean, that's when you're kind of doing the aerial view, you hit the high points, that this is a representation, but not something to be worshipped in and of itself, and an anchoring point for the people to try and be able to wrap their mind around coming to God at all.
Yeah.
Very really, like, if everything is to be taken word for word, the materials, while beautiful, while ornate, while all of those things, are very real materials. Like, we're talking about wood and metals. And so when thinking through the history of the ark when going through and like, okay, so it was here and this is where we can chart it in this and this. Also taking into consideration the climate surroundings, the geography of the situation. Like when we're going through these details of the object before getting into the conspiracy theory of it all, like there's a point to taking in the tangibility factor of the information that we have about the ark.
Yeah, well said. So a little bit of history before we move on to like where it could possibly be today. Eventually I think it goes from different places like Shiloh and Shechem, and then it resides in one specific person's land for a bit when David eventually becomes king of Israel, and then starts a new kingdom, a new capital in Jerusalem, wants to create a temple for God there. God won't allow him because David is a man who's killed a bunch of people. He doesn't want that started by someone, even though he's a man after God's own heart, who has that much blood on his hands. So Solomon will be the one to do it for him. So Uzzah, being the Brody he's trying to be, is bringing the ark to Jerusalem, but in the process, cart kind of shifts a bit. It starts to fall. He pulls his hand out, dead instantly. David gets afraid because he's wondering, have I done something wrong? Have I offended God? Why would he do this to Uzzah? And allows it to stay in a house of a Canaanite person who lives in Jerusalem for a bit, if I remember correctly. And God starts blessing the house. David goes, okay, God's still with us. I kind of just wasn't treating it as holy as I should have been. Brings it into Jerusalem. Solomon creates the temple later on. The ark is housed inside of it. That brings us to where we are, into where it could have gone. So around 1000 BC, we have the kingdom of David. A little after that, like I can't remember exactly when, but Solomon starts to reign. Solomon, full of wisdom, but also a stupid man, because, hey, humans are both. Imagine that. Is led astray by foreign wives to love foreign gods. God gets angry, as he is ought to do in that scenario. Solomon does eventually die. This kingdom split when Rehoboam, Solomon's son, decides to be a little, what's the word I should use here? Because it's one I want to, and it's not YouTube appropriate. We'll say jerk. And decides to levy more taxes on them, which they don't take kindly to, leaving only Judah and Benjamin behind for the kingdom of Judah, the other 10 tribes up north. And in the process of being punished by God for all this, Pharaoh Shishak, or Shishak the First, depending on your translation, invades the kingdom of Judah and sacks Jerusalem. Now, this is one person that they'll say was responsible for taking the ark. This is a representation of Shishak. So, Joe, lay it on me. As you've been considering these things, what do you think about the likelihood of this?
So the biggest problem is, depending on how you date the books,
Mm-hmm.
it would appear as though it appears again later.
Yes.
And so while the concept of it being taken by an invading force, or by a different force than the ancient Israelite people, this is not, I do not believe that this is the point where Egypt ends up with the ark.
Yes. And a lot of people, as we'll find along the way, do think Egypt does hold it at one point in time. Your mileage may vary on that one as well. But I agree. This is way too early. It would make sense. Why would an invading force not just seize it at this point in time? Well, if it's hidden away somewhere, or if God supernaturally hid it from them, or they just didn't make it into the temple. Like, who knows? I don't find this very plausible. And one of those reasons being later scripture that we do see in 2 Kings and Isaiah, kind of parallel verses there. In 2 Kings 19:14-19, Hezekiah approaches using the metaphor, the imagery of the two cherubim to bring prayers up to God, which heavily suggests it's there. then we get further confirmation that's actually there with King Josiah as he's trying to rebuild the kingdom once more, bring people back to worship of God. And 2 Chronicles 35, 1-6, he explicitly mentions bringing the ark back to the temple. So there are conspiracy theories about how this may be a replica ark and the actual one was taken, but I don't really buy into those that much. We'll do that later on. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I that whole idea of multiple arcs is not, it's found at several points of people trying to posit what they believe is the one true answer to this quandary.
Yeah. Oh, and I should have mentioned earlier, I used 2 books for some of my sources for reading through these. And as you might have seen in the subtitle down below under my name, Graham Hancock shows up a lot in them. I'm not a fan. We'll put it that way. I think he's one of those people who, yeah, sure, if you just consider an idea and throw it out there, that's fine.
Yeah.
But then you need to back it up with facts. You need to back it up with ideas. And if the first idea doesn't work, come up with a better one. And not being one of those people who's just doing it for the sake of, oh, well, people, if they're curious, there's a question out there, I'll just write a book about it and then say some stuff and people will believe it. That's kind of where I take him. Both of these people are kind of close to him. I know for sure Robert Cornuke, Search for the Ark of the Covenant. I don't know how that blurry photo is messing with me there. He is very much a Hancock acolyte, and I'm well aware of his biases there. Then we have The Lost Ark of the Covenant by Tudor Parfitt. He is one of those people that kind of similar, but instead of Ethiopia, he thinks it's Zimbabwe, and we'll get to that in a second. So I say all those things to say my 2 main sources were not the best. So in my humble opinion, you're better off just reading the Wikipedia article compared to those 2 books. Do not waste your money like I did.
Yeah. It's a weird thing when you look into researching stuff like this because it's so ambiguous and there's no clear cut, like, I'm going to give you the answer to the story right here and now on SG. We're going to break it. The Ark of the Covenant. We know exactly where it is. Like, come on, guys. And so why write a book? Like I says the guy who's in academia in this part of the, I get it. I understand. We're all on some nonsense. I understand it. But like, when it comes to specifically the arc, separate from the rest of the surrounding and the rest of the narrative, why write a book? There's no answer to the quandary. What are you going to accomplish? Like, what do you other than trying to make a compelling hypothesis on something that you literally cannot prove unless you find it? I mean, whatever. But yeah,
yes. This
is me being charitable, guys. I'm trying.
You don't know how much he's holding himself back right now. I can see it in his eyes. This is a family show.
Yeah.
We both wanted to say some things tonight.
Yeah, but yeah. So a lot of my coming into this, I had heard of both of those. I certainly know. I gave myself a little chuckle when I jumped in and I saw your #1 certified badge on the bottom of your thing, and I'm like, yeah, that's valid. I'm not a fan either. Yeah, so that's why I would suggest for anybody who digs this sort of stuff, is interested in a facts-based approach towards it. What can you actually learn about the time period, the actual structure itself, the whole thing? Read your Bible. Second off, try to look at the lens of history a little bit more than specific, like, and then take that and then couple that with the data that you have provided and the pieces that you can put together through biblical canon and kind of bring along history to kind of fortify that. And that's probably your best bet and there's going to be It's going to be easier to find information swept together with other pieces of information rather than trying to specifically find information on the ark and things like that, because that's a lot of people providing guesswork at best. And some people get paid too much money for educated guesswork.
And I'm not going to sit here and say they did no work. These people have been on site. Like, they've done some research. They've looked into things. I'm not saying they're completely and utterly, you can't listen to a single word that they say. But I am saying, if you're going to put it out there into the ether, at least be worthwhile. You know, don't waste my time as I'm prepping for this. You know, don't be, you know, as great as Wikipedia is. I love Wikipedia. Be better. You know, you're supposed to be the source.
Yeah. I guess if your thesis statement is hear something from a voice that was on site, then most of the academic community, when it comes to researching this stuff, can be held as reliable, if that's your thesis statement. For me, understanding a bit about how it's not inconceivable to end up on site and to be able to, you know, get a PhD, end up with the right people, end up at the right spot, sort of thing. I'm always a little hesitant to make those kinds of things qualifying statements for the legitimacy of, or not the legitimacy, the weight of a person's statements towards a specific topic. Not to mention, the book is just a friggin' cupcake. Like, it's cotton candy. It's air and sugar. It's not anything.
You're not wrong. I mean, you know how many hours of my life I wasted on those two books? The same amount of time I waste eating those things. Like, just pure sugar, just because it makes me happy. This did not make me happy. But moving on from there, as we get sidetracked again, that's just fun. It's nice to have someone else there who can, like, respond to those inane things that I say. So, just to hype your ego a bit, I'm really glad I have you along here on the ride with me now.
Yeah. So this is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Moving on from there, we get to our second option, that being Babylonia, or Babylon, you know, the Babylonian Empire, hundreds of years removed from this date. Starts invading Judah in the 600s BC, conquers it for good in 586 BC, 585, depending on who you're asking. Some even say 587. It's one of the things you got to learn about history is that the further away you get from it, the harder it is to prove. I hate that. It's a fact of life. But and when you're researching these things, you can have a precise date and it may not even be close.
Yeah. That's one of the things that that's why I always take the time, whether it's about some of the more fringe, nonsensical portions of this conversation or it's high academia. I always try to take time to counsel people seriously. Learn world history. Yes. If you are I would say that to anybody because it's just interesting, but if you are a Christian who is looking for more context on the Old Testament, if you're looking for more context on how the canon of Scripture interacts with the canon of the world, and any of those kinds of things, just understand pick up a history book and then understand how history is recorded and dictated and all of that kind of stuff, and literally throw out everything about America's history because it was all written by the victors, and I'll tuck that back in. Every once in a while, the best part about having a co-host for a gimmick is every once in a while you get to needle them a little bit. It's fun. Nonsense. Anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So just learn how, like you said, there are the way any of this kind of stuff works, any of these sciences work, is you have a theory until it is proven as fact. And that actually includes history. And so you have that we think it was from between 300 to 500 BC or whatever. Like there is a date range that even outside of biblical studies, this is just how history works. Like this is nothing unique to Christian history and all of that, or biblical history. And so understanding that, now you kind of have a better idea of, oh, okay, so this is this general time frame and this general time frame. And the beauty of biblical studies is that we have a number of those from throughout history, especially as you get into the New Testament, to be able to frame things around that. It's not out of the realm of consideration to be able to like reasonably think through some of these date ranges, as long as you're not hell-bent on establishing it is exactly at this specific date, because that's just not like you said, Christian. It the further that we get away from the date, especially when we're talking about the people that we're talking about, that's not like writing down things in a calendar the way that we conceive of it in the modern day would not have been the same thing back then. So it would not be actually really historically accurate to the time for there to be big extensive loggings and journalings and all of these pieces of evidence to essentially develop a paper trail for ancient Egypt and the comings and goings and different things like that.
Just for a more modern perspective on things too, like there have been a couple of autobiographies of Steve Jobs that have come out recently. And not that long ago. Some of them glowing reviews, say he's the greatest person in the world. Others of them saying he's the scum of the earth. You both recognize those were released around the same time. So which one is true? Well, you got to read that both. And that's in stuff that we can like objectively prove when some events happen there. So that's the modern age. We don't have the ability to spread information back in the day.
Right.
So we're left with what we have in a very violent era, in a world where, hey, Jerusalem just got sacked. Do you think that all of their historical records were left behind? I say
right.
Thee nay.
Right. Especially when you consider that these were not like, this is the way that victory was shown at this time was utter decimation or complete and total enslavement. And thus, as a part of enslavement, your historical identity would be completely obliterated as best was done. Fires to destroy any goods that you like, anything that any records that you would have, grinding of idols or statues or different things like that, dismantling of different things. Like it that's just the time period. There wasn't any consideration to antiquities at this moment in the world's history.
There's no one saying it should be in a museum at this point in time.
Right.
Don't exist. So Babylon comes in. Israel's gone at this point in time, having been destroyed by the Assyrian Empire. Judah is now destroyed as a nation. They are relocated elsewhere to then become separate from their national identity, to just become subjugated in another land and to closer to where Babylon is. So at this point in time, Babylon completely and utterly controls Jerusalem. They have all the access they need to the temple. There's no fighting force behind the left to prevent them from taking anything. This is when a lot of people do believe. I'm closer to this one sometimes. I flip-flop on some of this stuff, but I'm a little closer to this one. Like the ark may have been stolen. Now, if you remember our earlier conversation, how can these non-Levites, especially these non-Kohathites, have managed to pick up the ark? Which is an excellent question, one that deserves a good answer. My speculation being is that at this point in time, hey, God has left the temple behind. He's left the Jewish people to get exactly what's coming to them. Why not the same for the ark? Why not remove those same powers that it had before? Just because, well, who's going to use it now and actually worship him?
Right.
But I can't prove that.
Right. And this is the beauty of conjecture. And that's why, whenever you're hitting on these kinds of topics that don't have the a nice buttoned up finish and a nice button up ending to the story, you've got to be willing to step into the conversation with a with a spirit of grace and curiosity about you, because that whole, like, just being curious and wanting to have lively conversation about what if this, what if that, that's fun, that's enjoyable.
Yes.
That is without a need or necessity, burdening yourself with a need or necessity to prove that your exact idea is correct, and just positing, hey, within the realms of what we have, with what is considered by the book according to all data sets that we have, this is possible. What about this? What do you think about this? That you can have fun with. It's when we take ourselves too seriously when it comes to pinning down the exacts is where we start to run into problems. I'm with you. I think that if we were looking at the timeline and we were to be like, this makes the most sense, I would say, I don't know if I would hard say that I think that this happened, but I would say that I think that it's more plausible that this happened rather than the Egyptians taking it, unless that period was one that was there's a term for it that's escaping me right this very moment, but there were more aggressive invaders of Egypt that for intermittent periods took control of Egypt, and thus when they were invading or in conflict with other groups, it was this new regime. This is part of why we think that if you read into some of the academic opinions on that period where in between Genesis and Exodus, where there seems like there's like a loss of the history there. The thought process is that Egypt was reclaimed from one
Hyksos?
of the yes.
Yes.
Um so if you're looking at the lens of history, it's more conceivable that the Babylonians would be more apt to either take this or very intentionally strip it down and destroy it. Now, when it comes to the theology of it, because really when you're thinking about how could they do that, how could they destroy that, right? And this is kind of the first introduction of really this idea of, hey, it's not out of the realm of consideration that all they would think is that it is this holy object of these people that we just decimated. Let's destroy because remember, this is a time of a plurality of gods. That's the prevailing thought, is that there is a plurality, a pantheon of gods. And so with that would kind of be the big, driving hit, is to destroy their religious relics and all of that kind of stuff. Well, if the ark is simply a representation and a centerpiece to be able to create an imperfect temporary expression of a place for expression of worship and all of that, then if God's not in the situation anymore and has truly left them, it would conceive that this is just wood and metal. This is just materials at this point. It's nothing. The object is not the thing. It's God that's the thing. And if God is now detached from the object, then and I even struggle with that word detached, because we live in a hyper paranormal recognizing world. I think that's probably the most gracious way that I could say that. So saying things like that, the Spirit of God attached to something kind of has a particular ring to it in the modern vernacular.
Yep.
So even saying the word like he's detached, he's separated, he's no longer there, then yeah, it would just be stripped down, because you have to ask yourself in that moment, right? Where this man tries to catch the thing, struck dead, done. What's the point? What's the purpose? And if we consider what the purpose is, and this is in an entirely different context, I don't know as though that achieves some grander thesis statement of driving people to understand the realities of God, should God have started just slaying people if they tried to touch the thing. And that's assuming that it was actually destroyed. Again, there's a million different rabbit holes to every single one of these. So just talking about in terms of whether or not it's conceivable that the Babylonian Empire would have destroyed this, I do think it's at least conceivable.
Yeah. It's one of those things you mentioned it, like back in the day, you want to prove, hey, my gods are better than yours. I could easily see this being stripped down for parts and broken down, or even just housed somewhere else and say, look, here's the bounty of the loot that we took from this country, and these idiots thought their God would protect them. So that's the way it is. Like, did Nebuchadnezzar do anything to it? A man whose name I've never spelled right once. Like, sure, it's possible.
7 E's and 3 A's. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I once told my wife that I would absolutely rib our kid and name him Nebuchadnezzar and call him Neb for short.
Oh, that poor child.
Yeah. Is it possible? Is it possible? Sure. Does it make for a really interesting story, considering just off of pure name value? Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, Ark of the Covenant, those are all dramatic words. Those are all dramatic names. So does that make for a compelling story to say that is all tied together? Absolutely. That'll play after midnight on the History Channel. Shout out to people who grew up on the History Channel after dark. That got wild and out. I don't know who knows what I'm talking about, but that got wild and out.
Yep. Now it's just the History Channel.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious. That and Oak Island and whatever else they're doing. So moving on from there, which I find Oak Island fascinating, but we can't talk about that right now. We have to move on. The next kind of place that people kind of bring up is, hey, it's still within Israel, and this is a representation of Jeremiah the prophet, and that will make sense. I'd like you all to move your Bibles, if you will, to 2 Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Oh, wait, you don't have that in there? Well, you're better off for it. We'll get there in a moment. But this is 2 Maccabees, chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. And there it is written. I don't know if there's some specific translation for it, so I didn't accredit it. In the records, it will be found that Jeremiah the prophet ordered the deportees to take some of the fire with them as indicated, and that the prophet, in giving them the law, directed the deportees not to forget the commandments of the Lord or be led astray in their thoughts, when seeing the gold and silver idols and their adornments. With other similar words, he exhorted them that the law should not depart from their hearts. The same document also tells how the prophet, in virtue of an oracle, ordered that the tent and the ark should accompany him, and how he went to the very mountain that Moses climbed to behold God's inheritance. When Jeremiah arrived there, he found a chamber in a cave in which he put the tent, the ark, and the altar of incense. Then he sealed the entrance. Some of those who followed him came up intending to mark the path, but they could not find it. When Jeremiah heard of this, he reproved them. The place is to remain unknown until God gathers his people together again and shows them mercy. Then the Lord will disclose these things, and the glory of the Lord in the cloud will be seen, just as they appeared in the time of Moses and of Solomon, when he prayed that the place might be greatly sanctified. So, in Maccabees, which are well worth reading, don't get me wrong, I just think they're history masquerading as scripture. And history is very dubious at best. There's this idea in their minds, okay, we don't have the ark anymore. This is around 160ish, 150ish BC when these are being written. So about 450 years removed from the Babylonian captivity. And they're wondering as a people, where's the ark? What's going on? How can we explain its absence? Well, here's how you do it. You get name recognition. Well, Jeremiah hid it away in the secret hidden place in Israel. No one knows where it's at. And don't just trust me, bro. It's a thing. And which, by the way, I think it strains credibility to me, because if you read the book of Jeremiah, you see he wasn't very respected, would be the polite way of saying. He wasn't treated well by his fellow Israelites. They hated his guts because he was telling them the exact thing they needed to hear but didn't want to hear.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have a weird relationship with books like Maccabees. and
Don't we all?
This stuff that's extra biblical, because when I endeavored into the Old Testament and I started having conversations with rabbinical scholars and rabbis and stuff like that, there really is something enriching to the text in context of this giant swath of time, when you're able to have a conversation with somebody who is an expert in like rabbinical studies or Jewish studies or any of those kinds of things. Because intrinsically, Judaism and Christianity will always and forever be tied. And unfortunately, there is a subsect of people that, even with what we've already said, which is by all standards of measurement, especially when you get Christian and I together, has been largely inoffensive. If you think it's been otherwise, then
leave a comment.
Just leave a comment. Anyway, but when we look at the realities of these different works that pepper along the way and all of that, I do think some of them, because of the either the predominant voice that's associated with them. Here's looking at First Enoch, not second and third. That's a fairy tale.
Continue.
You're gonna get me in trouble.
So happy to be in trouble with you.
Yeah. And you know, these different books that I think, if we understood what they actually were and understood that these are historical, they're pieces of historical account that can kind of pepper the Jewish experience along the way. Awesome. Not canon to scripture for a reason. Thus needs to be viewed in a certain kind of way from the Christian context, because if we're talking for our Jewish brothers and sisters, they would not consider our perspectives in the same kind of way, nor would we process theirs in the same kind of way. But so in this subject matter, when you try to pull the lens out, is really where it starts to get a bit murky, because there's so many different other voices between Jewish study books, between books like Maccabees, between conspiracy theorists, between, you know, ancient astronaut theorists, and all of these other voices that think that that have something to say as far as the Ark of the Covenant goes. That's where it can start to get a little bit messy.
I agree. I love reading through the Apocrypha. In fact, I've got it right here. You know what I do for fun, listeners, besides this? I've got big books like this that, for fun, I read through this wishing there was commentary to make it even larger. You know, that's how cool I am as a person.
Well, but that's, I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe it's just because we're both geeks, but like, I look at that and I'm like, we have this tool, right? We have this thing where we can't seem to figure out what from what when it comes to the Bible sometimes, but we have this book that, while it's not canon, it doesn't need to be canon. You can still read it. It's not going to bite you. I promise.
Yeah.
It's
You'll
okay.
be fine.
But it's like literally like, oh man, I really wish they would have given us a handbook like of what they did and all of this kind of stuff. And like what it's called the Apocrypha. It literally exists. It's a thing. I promise. Read it. And then read it again. And if you still have a problem arguing over which form of baptism is valid, then read it again. I'm just gonna upset everybody. I'm just screw it. We're just taking him at everybody.
Continue.
But so yeah, I think it certainly provides some interesting I don't know. Some interesting fuel for conversation. But taking it seriously, I don't know about all that.
Yeah, it's fine. And it's one of those things that, hey, I know some listeners out there, maybe Catholic or Orthodox or what have you, and these are books that are within your canon. I'm not trying to like bring you down, but like I don't look at it as scripture. You know, I'm as Protestant can be. Imagine that. And part of that is looking at books like this because, hey, I've actually taken the time to read them, unlike most Protestants who just accept the fact that they shouldn't be in there and then realized, oh, this is why it's not in there.
Yeah.
Because of stuff like this.
And I'm gonna piggyback and I'm gonna heal on people here a little bit alongside you. We live in the information age. And being for or against something is dependent on the person. Fine, no problem. You've got your choice. We all have our choice. You know what you're talking about. That's all I'm saying. Like, be willing to research the things that that you stand up and have an opinion about. But also on top of that, understand that information for people who legitimately take, I'm talking about for people who legitimately take the conspiracy theories seriously and all that kind of stuff. A lack of information and about the subject matter leaves an open door for history channel after dark type nonsense, like these different conspiracy theories, different things like that. And so I'm with Christian on this one. I have been accused of being a Catholic, a non-Roman Catholic, but a Catholic nonetheless. I have been accused of that more than once. But when it comes down to it, if you had to put a label on me, it would be very Protestant. And that's based off of data and books and reading and information and wanting an honest desire to follow the truth. Wherever that truth leads, to follow the truth. And I don't see it jiving with some of these things that exist outside of accepted canon of scripture. Some of it's positive. Read it. It's fine. It's not going to hurt you. But that doesn't make it canon.
Yes. So back to Israel. It's one of those, it's possible. Israel, there are tons of caves. There are tons of great places you could hide stuff. Assuming that there was someone out there who really wanted to keep the ark safe, and it probably wouldn't have been one of the priests because they weren't doing their job. Right. The other prophets in the land outside of Jeremiah and a select few weren't doing their job. So it'd have to be an immense heist, an Ocean's 11 minus 11 BC or whatever we're going for here to get this done, but it's possible.
Yeah, you're talking caper of the century at this point. Like it's I
would argue not probable.
Yeah.
So we'll move on from there to Graham Hancock's favorite, and one that sometimes I admit I kind of like too. That being Ethiopia. This is the church where it is said to be housed. This is the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion within Aksum. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Now, why Ethiopia? Why the heck would it have ever ended up there? How far away it is from Israel? You've got some ideas presented. One of them being that you remember the good old Queen of Sheba. She came up, had Solomon's wisdom before her and praised him for it. Well, one of the things about her, as with characters, is just kind of show up. People start writing fan fiction about them because like they're so like intriguing. Like, why is she so important? Why is she specifically named out of all the years of Solomon's life? Why is she given such importance here in these verses? Well, it has to be because she's important, right? Well, it could have just been they just wanted to write it down. I don't know. You should take that up with God. The next time you're talking to the big G, just hit him up. And in this process right here, they did what people do sometimes when they're older. Kids, let your parents explain it to you at the right time. And from that union, a child was born in this hypothetical history, being Menelik the First, who is kind of like not a god king, something like that. It's like the founder of a nation in some respects in Ethiopian folklore. And that's one of the ties they use to bring it to him, is that Solomon was just so entranced by her, he gave her the ark and left a replica behind in Jerusalem, even though that's where God's people were. But don't worry about that. And it was brought then that way. Now, another, comparatively speaking, more plausible theory in my mind is that Jerusalem people knew it was going to be destroyed. They fled beforehand, took the ark with them. They ended up in Egypt, which there was a very large Jewish population in Egypt post the fall of Judah, because they found sanctuary there for a little bit. It was Elephantine or whatever the heck that island is, that they even created the second temple there. And some people think it might still be there in Egypt. But other people say they just went further south to flee from the Babylonians, as they did eventually take over Egypt too. They were afraid that they would take the ark from them. So they end up in Ethiopia here, intermarry. We're eventually to the point right now where they convert to Christianity, and it's in there. Joe, your thoughts?
So Egypt having it in the midst of all of this. Here's the thing about Egyptology, for those of you that don't know, is very there's a lot of money and very particular people vying for those top spots for new, undiscovered, or unsearched sections of Egypt. There's a lot of there are people that are like, really, you've got that group of people and then everybody else when it comes to Egyptology. The places that have been searched and excavated have been many times, because they are the places that you can, if you are an archaeologist, or specifically a biblical archaeologist, and you want to say that you were on a dig site, being able to say, oh, I was on this site in Egypt, is a really good resume builder, just being honest. And so, and generally the funding that you need to gain traction in a new area of Egypt, because we have only we have only searched and really excavated a very small fraction of Egypt and what was known of the empire of Egypt throughout antiquity. And so the idea of it being anywhere that would have otherwise been a popular place to search or things like that is not very likely. Not impossible, but
Yes.
if there was a group that really was dedicated to the secrecy of keeping it out of the public eye and all of that kind of stuff, sure. But at that point, you're writing the story, you're writing the narrative. like out of pieces, you're hypothesizing at the and at the very best.
Yeah, it's certainly one of the things. I even would find it a little more plausible that they were able to take it in the midst of the chaos and confusion down to Egypt, because hey, in Jeremiah we see people doing exactly that, and heading to this part of Egypt where they could just be their own little Jewish sect away from everyone else. And eventually, some could argue there's too much syncretism for them to be actual Jews. Some would say they're perfectly fine. Is what it is. I wasn't there, so I can't prove it. And they had the ark there, and then, oh no, the Babylonians still came and they conquered Egypt. Let's go to Ethiopia. That's an immense journey, don't get me wrong, but not without beyond the realm of possibility. But there are ways to prove to a certain extent if the ark is actually there, but certain people won't open the doors for some mysterious reason. Well, could that possibly be because it brings tourism and people just flocking over to these areas? Like, why do you think pilgrimage sites were a thing back in the day across all of Europe? Because if I have the bones of Saint whatever here, or, the tablecloth he left behind after he wiped his mouth, then, people are going to want to visit because, oh, I want to get closer to God, or like I am in the presence of someone holy. Like, it's for tourism, really. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. It's one of those things. I feel like I would be more inclined to think of humanity that if they had the key to tourism like that's exactly what would drive opening the doors and establishing a wholesale thing. I think for me, it's conceivable if you're looking backward that it could have happened during that time, but it's not as, I think if it was there, we would know about it.
Yeah. So, like, hey, one of those things is certainly possible, but like, citation it needed. Like, open up the door, let someone very smart in that area, carbon date it, what have you, so we can say, okay, this would have been constructed around here. So that leads plausibility. It's probably never going to prove it, unless someone suddenly dies, from touching it. God decides to bring that back into fashion. But I don't see it happening. Now, our next spot, probably one people haven't heard of that much. This is one of the things that Parfitt kind of focuses on in his book, and does have some ties in a way, because I learned this a couple of years ago. There's a group of people in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and a couple of the other smaller countries there that claim Jewish descent. And they've done genetic testing on them, and they've found that, maybe not Jewish, but definitely Arabian backgrounds for some of them, their own oral histories. They claim that they came down from Israel/Arabia and went all the way down here, intermingled with the people, and that's how they claim to come from a place called Sana, and Sana would have been, or Sena, I think they say Sana would be an area in Yemen proper at this moment in time. So that's if the stories are true. And one of the things they claim is that they had this artifact, and I'm going to butcher the name, so laugh at me in advance, Ngoma Lungundu, which in their tongue means the voice of God. And they claim that it has supernatural powers, most of which they would attribute as the very same that the Ark of the Covenant would have. And they would use this in battle when the Great Zimbabwe Empire was at its height. If you don't know what that is, that's not your fault, because guess what? Colonialism at its worst again, where they saw a bunch of stone structures far away from modern society and culture, and had to say, well, the only way it's possible for those to be there is some white people did it, because certainly not the Africans. They're not smart enough to do it. So a lot of studying that was done in these areas wasn't very charitable to the truth, shall we say?
Right.
And as a result, not a lot is known about the Great Zimbabwe Empire. And in fact, that name is kind of like our best guess for what they might have called themselves. And some have even argued that the reason the empire fell is that they abused the powers of the Ark, and that caused the destruction of the Great Zimbabwe Empire. So, Joe, lay it on me. What do you think?
So I was familiar with this, and this is a lot of it's three-fourths nonsense with a fourth of historical context to try and make it all make sense and be a little bit more palatable.
I can't say you're wrong. I think this is another one of those where you send out the initial thesis statement, and that's your idea for the paper, but you don't know how else the paper is going to be constructed. So you'll take whatever source you have available to make it sound like you knew what you were talking about from that thesis statement. Sorry, that lisp is coming in. That's what it is. It's fascinating. It's a part of history that has been neglected for a huge amount of time, very unfairly so, that needs more people researching it. Go ahead.
Agreed. And that's where, like, I'm of two minds, because if stuff like this allows us opportunities into different historical research and stuff like that, there's at least that. But unfortunately, you have this aspect that in this part of the world isn't really known about, isn't really talked about, or anything else like that. Then, and the only thing that you have then is the nonsense and the fairy tale of it all. Then unfortunately you have taken a shot twice on this culture, because this culture has to suffer the idea of colonialism, and then also on top of it be subject to just false stories about the antiquity of the situation, Yeah.
And as we know, the true story is that Solomon had gold and diamond mines down here, and he taught a bunch of apes to be intelligent and kill a bunch of people in a 1995 movie called Congo.
Yeah, it's about the size of it.
Yeah, the great documentary known as Congo.
Yeah.
I just watched that for the first time not too long ago, so it's on my mind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But another hypothesis brought out there is that, hey, it no longer remains on the earth proper. It is, in fact, in heaven. And honestly, if there's one that I actually favor, it's this one, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But why do people say this? Well, there's a verse in Revelation 11:19, which in the NIV, and I've recused myself from using the ESV because I know, Joe, you mentioned before on Buddy Walk, you're not a big fan of it. So in favor of loving you, my brother, I will use alternate translations. So 11.
I mean, you could have gone with one that has a little bit more meat on the bones than the cupcake of the. I mean, it's not the Message, so it's not cotton candy at least. So, but anyway,
there you go. Oh. All right, biblical translation slander. I like it.
Yep.
11:19. Then God's temple in heaven was open, and within his temple was seen the Ark of the Covenant. Pretty blatant and explicit. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. So, caveat. We're in the book of Revelation. That is my caveat. Because, guess what, guys? As someone who has studied this book immensely, it's one of his favorite books of the Bible, no one understands the book of Revelation. And if they say they do, they're trying to get you to join a cult. Run away. That's my free advice to all of you listening. If they start bringing all the women away from their husbands, well, I warned you beforehand. Okay, you have no one to blame but yourself.
Wow.
So
there you go.
I take this a little more seriously than I've been handling it. In that, when I look at Revelation, these specific rounds here, like we're getting a vision of what heaven kind of looks like from a human lens. And there is a very explicit something that John would have recognized, probably not by having actually seen it himself, and assuming this is Apostle John or whoever John of Patmos actually is. There's debate. Imagine that. And this is something he would recognize from the description as someone who has memorized scripture. Oh, that's the Ark of the Covenant. That kind of leads credence to me that it's no longer on this earthly realm, that, at some point in time in Jewish history, God removed it from the temple. Maybe at the very last moment, the temple was a thing before the Babylonians, Babylonians could have actually touched it. But that's speculation on my part. It's fun speculation, don't get me wrong. But once again, citation needed. Joe, have at it.
So when you're utilizing Revelation as your jumping off point, it's always turbulent waters. Because while I will stand here and I will defiantly look anybody in the eye and say, if your reading of Revelation, it can anyway be equated to Left Behind, we need to have a conversation. It had to come up. We talked about Revelation. It had to come up.
You're just offending everyone tonight, and I love it.
I'm just going to offend everybody. So, so that being said, Reader's Digest, aerial view. I think that the book of Revelation is the revelation, singular, of Jesus Christ. And the letters to the churches are the letters to the churches, plural. Those people, but concepts that could be pulled forward into perpetuity. So this is a revelation for anyone who has ears to hear. That being said, mixed into all of this cocktail is a bunch of supernatural stuff. We don't know exactly what it means. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but it's like in the words of the great philosophers. I don't remember the name of the band. It's the end of the world as we know it.
Was that REM?
I think it was REM. But it's one of those things that I think there's precedent for folks to be able to say, at least I can understand X from Revelation. At least I can understand Y. It's not like the whole thing is like just one giant fumbling around in the dark session or anything else like that. But like Christian said, if anybody's talking about having the answers to the universe, and unless they're making a joke that centers around the number 42, you need to be very discerning. There should be flags, sirens should be going off. It should be a whole thing. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things that could this be? I have heard eloquent speakers, people passionate, fired up, on both sides of the argument, using this verse to both try and give credence to the idea that the ark is in heaven, as well as try and talk about how this whole thing is metaphorical. This whole thing is just it's just imagery. This is not a real ark in heaven and all of that kind of stuff. Literally using the same text broken down. So it's, you ask a room full of Christians, you ask 12 Christians their opinion about this, you're going to get 16 different responses. You know what I'm saying?
Bare minimum.
Yeah. Do I think it's possible? Now, I'm the one who's like, I'm ribbing on all of these. Nobody's safe. Is it possible that God said, okay, here is this thing. Here's the thing that from the actual thing from history, this whole thing went down. Things went sideways. Y'all didn't listen. So I'm going to snatch this thing out the situation. And because later you're going to see that, yeah, hey, this same God that was present when the ark was created is the same God here. Sure. I could see that. Definitely. And I don't think you need to jump through any hermeneutical hoops to be able to make that make sense. So will I say that this is possible? Absolutely, without a doubt. I will always have a proclivity that points towards science. Guys, we talked about this last month. We'll talk about this month. Honestly, we'll probably figure out a way to talk about it next month. Christians, science is not going to bite you in the hand. You're okay. It's not going to hurt you. God gave us the understanding and the reasoning power to be able to understand and have documented theories and evidences for how the world works around us. That's not a bad thing. And so I say all of that tongue in cheek, but I know the materialistic nature of what it is that we're talking about here. Like I believe that I believe that a physical ark existed made out of the materials that we are given because God says in the establishment of the ark, hey, the blueprints will be on the mountain, but here you go. Like, I'm not expecting you to remember this whole thing. You're going to have blueprints for this. And so I think that there was something very real to be had in all of this. I think it changed hands a lot in very hostile environment, both due to people, but also agriculturally. Like the actual it was geographically harsh for for trying to maintain anything that was materialistic. That's why it's the exact same reason why we have so much trouble trying to get a clear look at Egypt's and the Middle East's history outside of what we have, because a lot of it's getting eroded by like sand and harsh elements and all of those kinds of things. So I think I don't see enough of an argument personally to put this in any kind of higher esteem than just simply where I would put it got destroyed due to time, or an invading force destroyed it, or something along those lines.
That's fair. And honestly, what is gold's erosion rate anyways? Like, as someone who knows completely nothing about, other than knowing erosion is a thing, do you think left to the elements would be worse off?
Yeah, I think given continued abrasive action, unless it's like buried deep, I think if it was exposed to the elements, given the rough, even the loosest estimations of where we're at in the timeline, in the amount of time that would have passed, I think that at the very least it could have been damaged enough to be unrecognizable if actually found. That's the other thing that I think that there's quite possibly we could find this thing and not and with no supernatural influence to give to the situation, and we're just talking about a material object that's been lost to time for time immemorial and all of that. I think there's a all too real idea that we could have found pieces of this and not even realized what we had in our hands.
Certainly plausible. All right, you ready to head to the final judgments? Where we review that all if we haven't already? So I'll go first. Like, as far as I'm concerned, there's very little evidence the Ark is around here anymore.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion, I think the idea of it being taken up into heaven, or honestly, beyond that, if I had to say something else, would be it's just gone, like eroded to the sands of time. But if I had to also take another option where I had to say it's here exactly, I'd argue somewhere in Babylon and just collecting dust in some ruin we haven't really gotten to yet in the midst of a very war-torn country. So there we go. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I think if it exists and it hasn't been destroyed, that there is that it is tucked away in some random spot in some remote aspect of the Middle East that we have not had a chance to be able to explore, and that the culture there would have zero interest in exploring or uncovering or things like that. I think if it exists, I do not think that there is a body of people who know that it exists. Yes, that means that I am actively stating that I do not think the Ethiopian church has it. Do I think that would be cool? Absolutely. For all of the reasons that we said at the very beginning. Sure, it would be cool. Like you said, man, if we had the 10 Commandments and Aaron's staff and the bowl of manna, and it's all there, and it's all sunshine and rainbows. Sign me up. I'll jump at the idea of going to go see that thing. I will enter into the years-long wait list that is trying to secure being able to see this thing. Absolutely. So for that, in that regard, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that either I'm wrong or we find it. But I think if we're looking at the tangibility factor, that answers the question for us. And if we're looking at the hyper spiritual answer, that also squares the circle. So yeah, I think I would fall in a largely similar position.
And with that, what do you believe, dear listeners and viewers? Where's the Ark of the Covenant located? Does it even remain on this earth? We didn't touch everything that history and folklore have on this subject tonight. So let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow-up on or more clarification for. I'm more than happy to do that. In the description below, you can find my sources used for tonight's program. And next time, the surprise dark horse victory for our next category, the weird and the unexplained. I put it on the list because I thought it was cool. Did not think a single person would vote for it. I was proven wrong, immensely so.
Yeah,
we have
now that I'm a part of the show. I've been keeping an eye on those polls, and I'm like, oh, let me see what's good, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, and then it won, and I'm like, oh, I guess I need to like research that. I guess I need to become like knowledgeable about that, right? About that sort of thing. So yeah, we've got the disappearance of the Ninth Roman Legion, so, and where they could have possibly ended up. So there's that.
So thank you guys for all that you do. And until next time, see ya.